So hello everyone, and thank you for coming to our 10th Bixby Marshland broadcast. I'm Wendy Word. I'm a civil engineer with the sanitation districts. As I mentioned, this program is being recorded and we're also going to post it on YouTube. We're going to answer your questions at the end of the broadcast. You can also type them in the Q&A feature, and we'll answer some of those in a typed format. And that's located at the base of your screen. If you have any technology issues, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll try to resolve those as we go. So as I mentioned, it is now my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, Lisa Fimiani. Lisa received the inaugural Dan and Susan Gottlieb Environmental Leaders Fellowship, and that's with Loyola Marymount University. Over the past 30 years, Lisa has done everything. She has an extensive knowledge of birds and insects and wildlife throughout Southern California. She's been the executive director for the Friends of the Ballona Wetlands for 7 years. She's been a docent for 14 years, and she's been on their board for 20 years. So she has a tremendous amount of experience in dealing with wetlands in Southern California. So she's the ideal urban naturalist. Here you see Lisa at our annual Bixby bird count, and she's in front of our California brittlebush, which we have about 360 of these plants. So watch out for those as we go through, and turn it over to Lisa at this point.
Good morning, everyone. So I discovered the Bixby Marshland the end of December with Tracy Drake on a Christmas bird count, and it was my first time to Bixby Marsh. Oh, what an experience. The marshland is only 17 acres, but it is packed with wildlife. You can see the outline here. And years ago, this whole area was once a marsh. It was formerly part of a larger freshwater marshland called the Bixby Slough. Here you can see people out birding, and there's other wildlife. You can see frogs. The marshland helps protect the area's resources, and marshlands are home to 43% of federally listed endangered and threatened species, so they're very important. They provide habitat for all types of life, birds, animals, amphibians. And here's what we had back in 1995. This was before a restoration project. And here's what they have today. And this is what I saw. I was just dazzled by how beautiful it was. Back in 1995, as they planned the future, this is what they got today. Hired a habitat restoration firm to do it right. There's a photo of Tracy Drake during our Christmas bird count. The restoration of this marshland helps the environment because over 95% of marshlands in California have been destroyed. And in this marsh, there are 5 distinct areas. You can see the water, sedges and rushes, shrubs, deciduous trees, sage, brush, and grass in the upland system. So you have an aquatic, riparian, and upland system, all 3 in the same 17 acres. It's amazing. So let's start our virtual tour in the parking lot. This lot was very carefully designed, and you're going to see some very unusual pine trees, Torrey pines, which are native to San Diego, where only about 3,000 exist. And the marsh is very pleased to have 124 Torrey pines. You'll also notice other types of riparian vegetation, such as the willow and smaller bushes with white seed pods, California buckwheat. You'll also see that the parking stops are made from repurposed eucalyptus. So when they removed those non-native trees, they were able to repurpose them in the marshland. The rubbish bins and benches are made from recycled plastic, and to help us further reduce plastic waste, West Basin Municipal Water District provided the refillable bottle stations for your use the next time you're able to come in to fill for fresh water. And you'll see that in just a minute as we virtually walk over to the bottle station. Oh, there's a pine cone of a Torrey pine. Isn't that beautiful? And here are some hummingbirds in a nest. Nests of hummingbirds are the size of ping pong balls, and they use spider webs to bind everything together. Amazing. So when we did the Christmas bird count, we found a sprinkler head that was leaking, and the birds did not miss a trick. Here's an Anna's hummingbird coming in for a bath, which we photographed. She's having a ball, getting a little drink, taking a bath. They're one of the most common hummingbirds along the Pacific coast. Yet they're not anything but common in appearance. They have iridescent emerald feathers and sparkling rose pink throats, the boys, and they are more like flying jewelry than birds. So here's a bird's eye view of the parking lot. And we're going to start our descent into the 5 distinct areas: open water, wetlands, riparian, meadowlands, and upland. And you'll notice that the vegetation has grown in over the last 11 years. You'll be able to see several of the 124 Torrey pine trees. And the trees with the yellow leaves that you see are the willows, which drop their leaves in the fall and winter. They're deciduous. You'll also catch a glimpse of the vibrant reds of the desert grape, and these cover the educational and round pavilions at the marshland. And at some point, we're going to see the open water. There it is. This is a photo of a male Allen's hummingbird, and look at his gorget. He is just gorgeous. Showing off to the girls, of course. Here's a female. And the female and immature Allen's kind of look similar, but because they lack the iridescent throat patch. Instead, they have a series of speckles on their throat. Like all hummingbirds, the rate of metabolism requires them to eat frequently, about every 10 to 15 minutes, and they consume twice their weight in nectar each day, visiting over 1,000 flowers. Now, this was the bird of the morning. Tracy heard one note and she said, "Oh, I think we have an unusual warbler up in the trees." And sure enough, we had a Lucy's warbler, which is a rare migrating bird. So this was a treat. It was a very small warbler. It was all gray and had a very small bill. You can see that tiny little bill and a short tail. And it has a complete white eye ring. We also saw a yellow warbler. You can just see the butt end of that yellow warbler. They move very fast. They're so hard to photograph. And along with the yellow warbler and the Lucy's warbler, we had an orange-crowned warbler, which that's like a hat trick. It's just so many beautiful warblers. So let's continue along the riparian path. We're going to walk towards the education pavilion, and you're going to see more of the riparian marshland, which had been planted with typical coastal sage scrub species. You can see willows and artemisia, which is also known as cowboy cologne. There's a story behind that. The cowboys used to come off the plains stinking to high heaven. They'd come into the saloons, but before they came in, they'd break off branches of the artemisia and rub it on their stinky clothes. When they got inside, people would start sniffing and they'd go, "Oh, you're wearing cowboy cologne." Here's some coastal sage scrub, some purple sage. You also find willows, very important plant in a riparian habitat. Here's the willow's catkins that are blooming, and bush tits and hummingbirds will use that to line their nests for their babies. Isn't that sweet? You'll see them flying away with big puffs of that in their mouth. Here's California sagebrush in bloom. You can see the little flowers at the end of the leaves. It's a beautiful plant and so aromatic. And here's one of my favorite, lemonade berry. So lemonade berry is also in the Biona wetlands. And when the berries become ripe like that, they're kind of sticky and gooey. So if you touch them and you lick your finger, oh, you're going to get such a sour taste. But the Native Americans used this plant and these berries, they crushed them and made a lemonade drink. And that's how they got their vitamin C and trace mineral contents. So I always taunt my students and I dare them to touch the berries. And when they do, I see them pucker and I just laugh because that's, you know, that's part of nature. That's the beauty of it all. Here's some purple sage. And as you can see, the flowers are purpley. The flowers, the leaves of the purple sage are kind of a light green. Aren't they gorgeous, the two together? We're now going to go to the education area. And here's a photograph of what it looked like in 2009 before the restoration. And it is representative of the riparian area of the marsh. The pavilion and the round one on the side are made from recycled wood. They used the old eucalyptus trees that were on the site to make these. And you can see California grapes growing on the pavilions. Now, this is a Rogers Red variety, which means they turn bright red in the fall. And so you can tell that, oh, we're in the fall. The leaves have turned orangey red. And they show the life cycle of the bark beetle. The larvae eat the wood, and then the mature adults emerge and then fly away, and the patterns end. So there's 110 species total at this site. 73 are native. There's willow, sycamore, cottonwood trees, rushes, sedges, mulefat, sage, coyote brush, artemisia, and desert grape. That's very important to use native plants because what it is a beacon to wildlife that this is where you want to come for food and resources and rest. Here's the desert wild grape as it blooms, and there it is showing its berries. And here are some visitors reaching up to grab a grape or two, which are very sweet and delicious. Now, when you have native plants, you bring in the wildlife, and this is a beneficial insect. This is a marginated calligrapher, and it's like a little bee fly, and they're very tiny. They look like mini bees, but they're very important pollinators in this habitat. This is a California grape. A California wild rose in bloom. Isn't it gorgeous, the petals? And here's a yellow-faced bumblebee. I love bumblebees. They love the California rose as well. Here's another beneficial insect in the blue elderberry blossoms. It's a deciduous shrub, and they shed their leaves annually. Here's the elderberry blossom and the berries. And some of you may know that elderberry is used to create a wine. You can also make elderberry jam. And the birds, of course, use it for food. So we like to leave the berries for the birds. So now we're going to walk across the bridge. And you can see some students back in the days before COVID-19 when we could do this sort of thing, and we will do it again. This is a beautiful bridge system that immerses you in the middle of the Bixby Marsh. And when you stand on the bridge, and I experienced this in December, you feel like you're right in the middle of it. In fact, Tracy and I were actually whispering to each other. We didn't want to disturb the wildlife. So here you can see tule and California, or they're known as California bulrushes. This was a very important plant for the Native Americans, by the way. They used this to make their key or their hut or ki'ish. Here's another beautiful view on a bright, clear day. We're going to do a little pan here from the bridge. And again, we're looking at the area, the open area, open water area, and the wetlands area. Look at this. Here's a Canada goose with her goslings. The goose is native to North America, and its migration occasionally reaches Northern Europe, believe it or not. Like most geese, the Canada goose is primarily herbivorous, eats plants, and normally migratory, but it tends to be found on or close to fresh water, and if they like a place, they stay, which is good and bad. Geese are very loud and demonstrative. You just saw some baby mallards. Aren't they adorable? And here they are. Thanks, Wendy. Aren't they adorable? Mama taking care of her babies. Very important area for them to swim. They find food at the bottom of the shallow water. And they come up on the riparian area because that's where they need to lay their eggs. So a wetland is not just one ecosystem. It has to be a whole mix for wildlife to thrive. Here are some mallards that are probably in eclipsed plumage, and that's a winter plumage where they're kind of wearing dull feathers, waiting for the spring, when the males will start showing off their really vibrant colors to impress the females. And here they are. They spend a lot of time doing this, and you're probably wondering what they're doing. They're actually skimming the water, picking up invertebrates, and their teeth are very much like a baleen of a whale, and they're sucking in water and then spitting it back out again and sucking up some of the plants and some of the insects in the water. That way they get enough protein and enough carbohydrates in their diet. Oh, here's a great egret. And you'll see these flying over the marsh and standing still in the reeds and the tule. It's a large white heron with a dagger-like yellow bill, long black legs. Note the angled kink in the middle of the neck. They forage in shallow wetlands by slowly stalking their prey. Here's one of my favorites, a black-crowned night heron. Look at that red eye. That's just amazing. This is an adult, and they're stocky birds compared to many of their long-limbered heron relatives. Here at Bixby, you'll see an adult. You see this adult with neck tucked in, which is very typical. Adults overall are pale grayish with black cap and back, and they're red eyes. They're mostly active at night. That's why they're called black-crowned night herons, or at dusk. However, this adult flapped out from the daytime and will roost to forage in areas in the wetlands. And here's a beautiful song sparrow. You usually hear them before you see them. They're very quick and they're beautifully marked. Look at the russet and gray bird and bold streaks on its white chest. It's one of the most familiar North American sparrows. Oh, here are some flame skimmers. Great name to describe them, isn't it? A male and female. They're a common dragonfly, native to Western North America. Here's a male. Isn't that gorgeous? Look at the intricacy of the detail on its wings. And here's the female. Many female species are duller in color, not because they want to bore you, but because they need to blend in. They have to blend in, especially when they're raising their young. Otherwise, they're susceptible to predators. So that's why the females aren't as brightly colored in most species. So we're going to go back now and explore other areas of the marsh. So water is taken from the nearby Wilmington Drain, and it provides a habitat for many creatures. It is treated and then returned back to the Wilmington Drain. So marshlands actually provide the lungs and the kidneys of the land. They wash the water and cleanse it before it moves on its way. They are so important to our urban habitats in particular. Look at this great view. We're zooming in now over the bridge that we walked over earlier, and you can see the wildlife. The sanitation districts and the Los Angeles County Flood Control District signed agreements and installed a pump to lift water from the Wilmington Drain into this marshland and maintain the area as a freshwater marsh. The sanitation districts maintain the pump and marshland. You can see the cottonwoods and the willows. So here we're walking into the vegetated area, number 3, the riparian area of the Bixby Marshland. And that's we just saw a beautiful sycamore, and now we're seeing some more sycamores. The plants in this riparian area are well suited to the area. They can handle a lot of water. Here's a Fremont cottonwood. It's well adapted to the riparian area. They have heart-shaped leaves that are green on both sides. And the stalk of the leaves is flattened sideways, so the leaves have a fluttery movement in the wind. They're just beautiful. 90 cottonwood trees can be found at the Bixby Marsh. The sycamore tree also serves as the larval host for the western tiger swallowtail butterfly, which is a beautiful butterfly. There it is. You also can see woodpeckers. This is a yellow-bellied sapsucker. She's eating bark beetles, which inhabit the sycamore trees as a result of the last drought. So even though that's not good, the beetles provide food and sustenance for some of our wildlife. Unfortunately, the beetle vectors are a disease. They carry a disease known as Fusarium dieback, and that can result in the death of the tree that it infects. So currently there isn't an effective treatment, but hopefully in time, either nature or mankind will figure out a way to kind of keep that under control. The good news is that the replacement sycamores are healthy and thriving. So we're now going to complete our tour by visiting the meadowlands and the uplands of the marsh. As you can see, the native vegetation is flourishing. And we're going to walk where we have grasses. And some of the plants you're seeing now are mule fat. There's Artemisia, there's Encelia. This is mule fat, and it's nicknamed that because apparently the miners years ago used to let their mules chomp on this bush when they were carrying their heavy loads of equipment to mine. And so it got the nickname mule fat. It's a willow-like shrub, and its leaves are very similar to the willow. Here it is in bloom. And of course, where you find mule fat, you're going to find birds. And here's a beautiful female common yellowthroat. They're very quick. They dart in and out. They breed through Alaska, Canada, and the northern US. They spend winters in the southern states and the tropics. They are monogamous within a breeding season. When choosing a mate, females appear to prefer males with larger masks. Look at that mask. They wear like a black mask, like Zorro. And here we see an American kestrel. Across the water, beyond the meadows, we have the uplands, and this is where the kestrel will hunt. It is a small hawk, the smallest hawk found in North America, and it eats bats, rodents, insects, frogs, small reptiles, and birds. They nest in the holes of trees. Oh, now you can see an adult. Look at that red eye in the distance. You get a glimpse of the female, and she's stalking her prey. She's surveying her territory. Here's a male juvenile Cooper's hawk. Look at the markings on its breast. Isn't that gorgeous? This one in particular is saying, "Mom, Mom, I want food." And we kept hearing this calling, and he seems to be calling for his mom over and over and over. His right eye has a little bit of a sore or something, but usually birds heal very quickly when they have an injury like that, probably from flying into a bush or something. When they're young, they're kind of clods. They're learning how to fly. They're just navigating their habitat, and they're getting used to their big claws and their wings. And so they've got a lot to learn in a very short period of time. And this is a picture of him as the sun was rising. He's absolutely gorgeous. Here he is a little closer up, again, calling for mom. The eyes cannot move in the sockets, so he has to keep his head moving in different directions constantly. And when he's wiggling his head, it's as if he's zeroing in on something. He's kind of doing this. He's probably looking for his mom. Now here is the juvenile who was dropped a bird, and he decided to take it down to the bridge and watch what he's about to do with it. He wants to make sure nobody else gets this bird, so he's going to spread his feathers around it and still call for more food. You've already got a bird. You need more? I guess you do. But he's pretending that he has nothing there so nobody sees it. These are amazing shots that Tracy got. And here's the Cooper's hawk in flight. Having eaten, the young hawk went off to explore his homeland. This particular Cooper's hawk grew up at the Bixby Marsh and has been watched by bird watchers in his development. So there's a lot of stories to tell here at the marsh of wildlife living and thriving.
So thank you so much, Lisa, for taking us on a tour. And we are really super excited because what I'm going to do right now, if you want more information on the Bixby Marshland, certainly contact us here at the sanitation districts. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to let Lisa take us on part 2, which is a journey that shows how Bixby connects to larger regional wetlands. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and then Lisa's going to take you into the Bionah wetlands. So thank you for that, Lisa.
Absolutely. So I lived in the Southern California area for over 30 years. And one of the first nonprofits I got to know was Friends of Bionah Wetlands, and I would go and volunteer for them. And I was immediately struck by the simplicity of what they were doing. They were just trying to save this little wetlands. And over the years, hold on one sec. There we go. You'll see that this is at high tide at the Trestle Trail viewing platform, and here's low tide. So that tells you that we've got saltwater influence here at the Bionah wetlands. The Friends' mission is very simple: to champion the restoration and protection of the Bionah wetlands, involving and educating the public as advocates and stewards. And this is a view from the winter. You can see there's snow in the mountains in the distance. And here's the salt pan, historic salt pan, been there since the 1800s. The Friends of Bionah Wetlands was formed by our founder, Ruth Lansford, in her living room. She had 5 initial members of this small nonprofit. They gathered dues in a coffee can so they could have refreshments for their meetings. They hired a lawyer pro bono, and the lawyer filed the first lawsuit to save the wetlands. What a lot of people don't realize is the whole property was owned by Howard Hughes. He had an airplane factory where he would do all kinds of experiments to help the war effort, setting planes on fire and testing retardant and all kinds of things. But he used most of the wetlands as a crash site for his spruce goose, which he kept housed at the Bionah wetlands. And it took off on the longest runway in the world, which I'll show you in a few minutes. So in 1984, the Friends filed the first lawsuit to save the wetlands. And in 1990, they negotiated a successful end to the suit, saving 340 acres. Now, initially they were offered about 34 acres, and Ruth and the other members of the Friends said, no, not enough. In the 1990s, the Friends worked with other organizations and elected officials to improve 2 tide gates that were put in mainly so there wouldn't be any flooding. It wasn't for ecosystem services. It was basically so Howard Hughes didn't have to deal with the disruption of seasonal flooding, and he would get in trouble with the local authorities because his property was flooding the local roadways. So we got those tide gates fixed finally, and in doing so, it provided a stable habitat for the endangered Belding Savannah sparrow, which is a beautiful little sparrow that I've seen many times out in the wetlands. And this is what pickleweed looks like where they nest. Up close and personal, you can see the white blossoms, and the red you see is the plant purging salt at the tips of its leaves. You can actually eat pickleweed. You can make a pickleweed salad. We do not recommend that you harvest it in the Bionah Ecological Reserve, but on property where it is not protected, you of course can harvest it, or you can grow it yourself. The Friends, as I said, worked in the 1990s to restore tidal flow by getting those tide gates fixed. And this is a photograph of the east channel at high tide, and there's the east channel tide gate. Here is the salt pan over here that's flooded. This was very important to stabilize the habitat for the Beldings. And as a result of our efforts, the Belding Savannah sparrows increased from 13 pairs in 2009 to over 50 6 years later. And their population has remained stable ever since. So we have over 100 birds flying around in the marsh. This is a view of the area where the Friends and LA Audubon is permitted by the state to lead tours. Here you can see the east tide gate and the west tide gate. Here, this is the west channel, west tide gate, east channel, east tide gate. Here is the original 8 acres that we were tasked with restoring. And this is the trail out to the viewing platform that I showed in the very beginning of this presentation. In 2003, the Friends of Bionah Wetlands collaborated with the state, Trust for Public Land, and other environmental groups to purchase even more property. And the total acreage of the land that was saved is 600 acres. Now, what's important to know is this 600 acres is part of a larger wetland ecosystem. But this map that I wanted to show you shows where Playa Vista, the developer, built. They built on a parcel of land called Area D. It was the most degraded part of the property. It's where I mentioned before Howard Hughes had all kinds of experiments on aircraft fires and factory stuff going on, and the longest runway in the world. So the property that was saved and will be restored is really the most desirable property of all. And here you can see another map. I love maps, by the way. That's why I'm going to show you a lot of maps. And in 2005, finally, the area was designated an ecological reserve. So it was a step-by-step, incremental path to protect this property from future development. And as you can see, here's Marina del Rey. That took up 900 of the 2,000 acres of the wetland, the Bionah wetlands ecosystem. So you can see how this little part that's left is so important. It's the last wetland in LA County to be saved. Here's another map, again showing the parcels, area A, B, C, and this is the Playa Vista Development Site D. This chart shows really what's happened, and this is why restoration is needed. Back in the 1800s, I'm just going to focus in on number 3, native-dominated vegetated wetland. We had close to 40% native vegetation. Just a few years ago, we were down to a little over 8%. And then if you look at the next line, non-native dominated wetland and upland, we are now at almost 50% non-native plants taken over the wetlands. And back in the 1800s, there were no non-native plants. So this flip-flop has had dire consequences on the marsh. It's been slowly dying since the 1800s. And if it wasn't for the efforts of the Friends and LA Audubon and other interested groups, the success we've had with the 8 acres of dunes would not have happened. And here it is very visual to show you the non-native dominated vegetation cover. The native has to compete every year with the non-native plants. So that's why their removal is so important. Here is a view of the Ballona watershed. As a reminder, there are 9 watersheds in Southern California. Ballona is one of them. 128 square mile watershed. It goes as far east as Dodger Stadium and Griffith Park. It goes north to Malibu and south to the Dominguez Channel. And this is what Ballona looked like back in the 1800s. It was just one big lagoon. And we think the name Ballona came from a Spanish word for the word that means whale, ballene, because whales used to bring their calves in here to rest on their long migrations up and down the West Coast. Here's an image of a hunter duck hunting with his dogs on Centinela Creek. Centinela Creek merges with the Ballona Creek, and there's also what's called a Centinela ditch that eventually became Bluff Creek, which I'll show you in a moment. And this is the impact, human impact on the wetlands over the years. Between oil derricks, channelization, dumping, the dredging and creation of the marina, dredging, and also agricultural celery patches. To this day, you can still find wild celery growing in the salt marsh. A lot has been done to the Ballona wetlands, and it's still there. This is Dr. Howard Towner. He would lead educational tours in the Ballona wetlands in the 1980s. He's one of the original board members of the Friends. Tragically, he passed away at a very young age, in his 50s, I believe, of a heart attack. But you can see he's got all these native plant examples on this table to teach people about the value of this degraded wetland. Here he is in the field. This is San Verbena in the background. So he was not only a professor at LMU, he was one of the original Friends board members, and he was a very important voice and scientific resource for the Friends and for the community to understand the importance of this wetlands. Politicians got involved very early. This is Barbara Boxer with the late Mary Thompson. I have a story where I was following Mary one day on the trail. I was volunteering. We were pulling out ice plant. We were watering some silver dune lupin that she had recently planted. And I thought to myself, we're never going to get this ice plant out of here. But I didn't say it out loud. Here she was in her 80s, and she's toting the water. And you'll see in a minute, we did it. This is a beautiful painting that she did. Mary is a story in and of herself. She was a mother of 5. She had a special needs child. She was an educator. She was an artist, obviously, because she drew this beautiful painting. She did a lot of research on the Gabrielino Tongva. And this is what the Ballona wetlands looked like back in the day when the first Americans lived there. You can see there's children in the wetland area. They're gathering seafood. There's a group here in a tiat or boat. They go out to sea. There's a group coming back from hunting. They've got a deer. This group here has acorns in what are called gathering baskets. They've got wild dogs to help protect their community. There's the key that portable houses that they move around depending on the seasonal floods. She did a great deal of research on the area, and this print is available through the Friends website if you're interested. Many of you may not know that Ballona is a sacred site. This is Robert Dorame, the most likely descendant, with Ruth Lansford. This was taken a few years ago, where we celebrated a grand opening of a medicinal plant garden, which I'll talk about in a minute. This is Justin Farmer, who is a Native American from the South Bay, and I asked him to come up and teach some Girl Scouts how to weave baskets. And he was so adorable. We had so much fun that day. These are memories I will never forget. It was just incredible. What's important about this link I have here is Robert is quoted in this 2008 article as being really angry and bitter about what happened at Playa Vista. And remember, Playa Vista is part of the Ballona wetlands. But fast forward 10 years later, and when he sees what has happened, that the remains of people who were buried there were respected, he has now come to the opinion that Ruth and the others involved were well-meaning and wanted to do what was best for his ancestors. And I love being part of this story, and I'm humbled by it. And I think we've accomplished a lot here. The Ballona story is one of the most successful restoration stories in the country. And it's because we started with respect for our elders, respect for our indigenous peoples. And I am very proud of that. And I'm sharing that with you now. Now, the Friends are also known for their successful dune restoration. And this is where I got really involved. We would remove all this non-native plants material and trash from the Ballona Creek. And in just 10 years, we removed 10,000 cubic yards of invasive plants and garbage. Here's some people with, these are college kids with ice plant adorning their heads. This is a very heavy non-native plant that was used a lot in landscaping years ago because people just thought, well, you know, it'll grow here. It's from one of 5 Mediterranean zones around the world. Why not? Well, of course, that's how the Wild West was treated. Why not? Let's do it all. But there are consequences. And what we've seen 40 years later is that all of the native habitat was severely compromised by the introduction of these non-native plants. Now, this is my favorite part of the presentation. This is a photo of the dunes in 1995. You can see ice plant in bloom. You can see some remnant silver dune lupin. You can see European grasses that were brought here for the cattle and for the horses. Here's some more ice plant over here. Now watch what happens 13 years later. Ta-da! After removing the ice plant, the silver dune lupin is allowed to reestablish itself, and the buckwheat is allowed to come back. And because we brought back the plants, we brought back the wildlife. And I talked to some retired teachers who were docents for LA Audubon and for the Friends, and they would tell me stories of leading tours in the beginning with no wildlife out on the trails. But once the plants came back, all of the wildlife came back. And this is a very dramatic flyer that I used to speak at a Coastal Commission hearing saying, this is what has to happen in the other areas. We've got to remove the non-native plants and bring back the native plants so that we can bring back more of the wildlife so they can survive in a healthy environment. And in July of 2011, after years of pestering California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I kept saying, you know, we've got coastal buckwheat. We've got the buckwheat for the El Segundo Blue. Can't we reintroduce them? And they said, nah, you don't have enough. Well, we did, because we discovered a small population of the El Segundo Blue butterfly in an area where we had restored. And I was so excited. This is the male. Isn't he gorgeous? These photos were taken by Don Sturba, who's an avid birder and volunteer for the Friends and Audubon. Here's a female and a male. The female is kind of charcoal gray. And by the way, they're no bigger than the nail on your thumb. They're so tiny. And again, the magic of bringing back our native plants is you bring back all the wildlife, from the legless lizards, which are endangered, western fence lizards, alligator lizards, side blotch lizards. I got to experience all of this the last 30 years. And one of my favorites are the doodlebugs, the antlions, which you don't see them at first. You see these little pits on the trails, on the sand trails, and then you realize there's a little insect at the bottom of that pit. And during a certain time of the year, they turn into a flying insect that's pretty big. It's about an inch and a half long. And it wasn't until Tracy Drake, who's the manager of all the park systems in Torrance and is the former manager of Madrona Marsh, She discovered them when we were doing a butterfly count. And I said, oh my God, what's going on, Tracy? And she goes, this is very rare. We're seeing them during maybe 5 days they're in this form. So all kinds of magic happens when you bring back the native plants. Here's harvester ants, which at first glance, if you don't know your ants, you'd think, oh my God, these are fire ants. Nope, these are our native dune ants. They're very important to the ecosystem. We have snakes, king snakes and gopher snakes, and they're only interested in rodents. They're not interested in you. So people who come out who are terrified of snakes, I have to explain to them, it's okay. They're not going to jump out at you. They're afraid of you, if anything. We do have an occasional rattlesnake. They're very rare, but they are out there in remnant areas. We also have pocket gophers and ground squirrels and cottontail rabbits and coyotes. This is an image of a coyote I took one day. I couldn't believe it. In broad daylight, it just goes trotting down the trail. It was insane. It was like, where did this coyote come from? And here's 2 images of coyotes in the freshwater marsh. Oh, I'm sorry. This is one of the salt marsh and the freshwater marsh. They're all over. So imagine what we did on 8 acres of dune habitat. Imagine those restoration efforts and even more ambitious efforts being implemented in the remaining 592 acres. This is Area A. It is completely blanketed in ice plant. Yes, there's wildlife there, but they're just barely thriving. They need the native plants. This is Area C. This is what's called garland chrysanthemum. It's a beautiful plant, but it's not native to our area. And in the spring, it's in full bloom and it's gorgeous, but it crowds out all our native plants. This is what it looks like from the sky, from a drone. And what I'd like to see years from now is the yellow that you would see would be from our California sunflower, our Encelia. But that's going to take a lot of effort to get that done. One of the things that the Friends is celebrating in partnership with the developer. And at first we were not friendly, as you can imagine, because we filed a lawsuit to stop them from developing. But once they agreed to the terms that were set, not just by us, but by the state and other nonprofits like Trust for Public Land, they had to build a 51-acre freshwater marsh ecosystem to process the storm runoff from their development site. And what came first was 26 acres of a freshwater marsh to be joined in 2007 with a 25-acre riparian corridor under LMU. And I was witnessing all of this. I was part of all of this. This is my patch. This is where I bird. This is where my heart is. This is what the wetlands looked like in 2003, the freshwater marsh. Here's the riparian corridor when it was first developed. And you can see it's going under the LMU bluff. Look at this rainbow. This was an image I got when I was up on Cabora Drive. And of course, if you restore an area, you lure in birders. This is Don Sturba, Dick Barth, 2 very famous women I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And we're starting our monthly bird surveys. This is Barbara Elliott and Jean Pickus. They, on their own, without being paid, as volunteers, conducted monthly bird surveys for over 10 years. And of course, they attracted students and staff from the Friends and Audubon and local schools. And we learned so much from these women. Here's a kid that is now going to UC Davis and studying biology and birds. He was so inspired by what he's seen at Ballona Wetlands. This is Nessa Frechette, who is the manager of the science programs at the Friends of Ballona Wetlands. And we partner at LMU in my Center for Urban Resilience with the Friends on all kinds of projects in the wetlands. And this is what it looks like today. Again, it's a mecca for wildlife. Here's an image of the freshwater marsh with the details of what the marsh does. In the first year of its existence, it survived what's called a 50-year flood. That is very important because the naysayers accused the developer of building something that would flood Lincoln Boulevard and flood Jefferson. It did not. It also survived a 100-year flood, so it was built very well. And this marsh cleanses 1,000 acres of storm runoff, 500 of the Playa Vista development footprint, and another additional 500 acres. The water's cleaner than it's ever been going out to the Santa Monica Bay. And it cost $18 million for the developer to build this freshwater marsh system. Here's a view of the entire system. There were 3 major objectives: wildlife habitat, improve water quality, and flood control. And they've accomplished all 3 and then some. And this is the then some. The old saying, if you build it, they will come. Being an avid birder and a bird geek that I am, within 5 years of building the marsh, we went from 80 species to over 200, 15 breeding, and 5 of those breeding species were considered indicator species, meaning they're very picky. They wouldn't breed there unless the conditions were absolutely perfect. So you talk about a win, win, win. This was a quadruple win. And this is just a collage of bird images that I've gathered over the years that just speak to my enthusiasm of what you can see in this beautiful freshwater marsh. We're up to 262 species. It's crazy. But again, it's the old saying, if you build it, they will come. We've got butterflies, dragonflies, spiders, bees. Every day is an adventure when you go out there. We have tree swallow boxes and a successful tree swallow breeding program. Last year, for the first time, we had a professor from LMU actually work with Nessa Frechette to band some tree swallows. So we're going to start tracking their movements over the years. Restoration works. The Bionah wetlands used to be a celery patch in the salt marsh and a lima bean field in the freshwater marsh area. And because of their efforts, they've transformed an area that was degraded and not functioning at all. Here's an image from 2001. Now watch what happens. The marsh was created with pumped up groundwater initially, and then it was going to be fed with the storm water from the 1,000 acres around it. Look what happens a few years later. Vegetation's coming in, part of the $18 million used by the developer to put in native plants. Plants keep growing. And this is what it looks like today. It's spectacular. But Playa Vista wasn't done. They still had more work to do. And the partnership between the Friends, the community of Playa Vista, and LMU resulted in a park that was in the community of Playa Vista. And in 2010, this was the start of a new beginning. Bionah Discovery Park is a little under 2-acre open-air cultural and scientific museum without walls, complete with historical and hands-on interpretive panels in an ADA-compliant urban park located in the community of Playa Vista. What's important about this is people on wheelchairs can come here and enjoy and experience the Bionah wetlands. They can't do it right now in the salt marsh. The sand, the dunes are too hard for wheelchairs to go through. One day that'll change when it gets restored. But we were so excited when we opened this park. And our tagline is, come experience Bionah by going through the park. You can do this today. The park is open even during COVID-19 restrictions, as long as you are safely distanced from other people and wearing masks. This is an image of the park. It was beautifully designed by Brenda Levin and Associates. Imagine being tasked with this. You need to create a model of a watershed, and you have 2 acres to do it in. She did it. Here's the interpretive panels. And I remember sitting on committees. We would meet every couple of months. I was working at Paramount Pictures at the time. And we would meet to discuss what was going to go on these panels. And the committee that met were people from the developer, from LMU, and from the Friends. And we wanted to tell the true story. So it was very important that we talked about the sacredness of this land and our ancestors, the Gabrielino Tongva. As you can see, they're prominently displayed when you come into the park. And for fun, we created these journals to hand out to kids, and our tagline was "Neighborhood Wellness Begins Here." So the kids had something to write on, to write down all their experiences that they had when they were in the park. The signage tells the story along the way about wetlands in general. So this is really a model for all wetlands. If you go through this park, you're going to learn about your wetland wherever you live, even if you're not in the Bionda watershed. This is my boss, Dr. Eric Strauss, teaching students about watersheds. We're starting at the cityscape, the mountains. And here we're looking at a rain garden and a storm drain, and we're showing demonstratively the importance of these rain gardens to slow the surge of storm water before it goes raw into the drains. It needs to be cleansed by wetland plants. Here I am teaching some students in a key or kiish. This is our meeting place in the Bionda wetlands, the Discovery Park. This is one of the most beautiful elements of the park. I feel so serene in this park, and you will too if you haven't been here. You have to come through and just sit here. There really are no words for what's going to happen to you when you're in this park, and especially in the key. There's recordings here done by a Native American actress by the name of Tantazin Carmelo, and thank God she did this. We are so grateful and so humbled to have them as part of our story. Here's Dr. Strauss again, teaching about the watershed. We're looking up at LMU. We're in the cityscape area. We teach kids about birds and bird watching in the park. And there's a bird looking out over the riparian Bluff Creek area. Kids are learning about biodiversity, how everything is connected. And everyone who comes to this park gets a lesson. Whether they listen or not, they're told in subtle ways what they can do to make a difference in their watershed. And a few years ago, we refurbished the Swimmer Medicinal Medicine Garden. It is so beautiful. Come and walk this part of the garden. This is what it looks like today when everything's in bloom. We've got woolly blue curls, St. Catherine's lace, California fuchsia, mugwort, poppies, yerba manza, yerba santa. Oh, it's just gorgeous. And there's a whole story about what the plants do medicinally for you. Back in the day, only shamans could tell their people how to use these plants. We also added bird feeders last year, and that has turned into a great lure for the local bird community and for people to watch the birds. And we put up signs. We made sure that the park was meeting all the criteria to be certified as a pollinator habitat, wildlife habitat, and Audubon plants for birds habitat. It's also a registered garden with the American Public Gardens Association. And in 2019, we put up an osprey pole on the campus of LMU, and you can see it from Discovery Park. Here are some students from LMU on a tour of the park, pointing at the osprey pole. And we had a great dedication ceremony where we invited the local elementary school next door, which is a member of the LMU family of schools, Playa Vista Elementary School. And guess what their mascot is? An osprey. So it was perfect. We had 400 kids from the school. We had Robert and his niece. We had my boss. We had the principal from the elementary school and David Kay from Southern California Edison. By the way, Southern California Edison provided the equipment to put up the pole, free, pro bono. We didn't have to hire them. We didn't have to pay them. And as if on cue, the day of the dedication, an osprey flew over. It It was amazing. Robert wrote a beautiful poem about the osprey, and we had the kids recite it during the celebration. And not shortly after we put the pole up, an osprey actually visited the pole, but we haven't had any takers deciding to nest yet, but that will come. What you're hearing in the background is my bird clock, sorry. Actually, it's perfect. It's a red-winged blackbird calling in the background. So I'm going to go through these slides very quickly now. This is how you can explore the Ballona Dunes. Again, the plants are so gorgeous. You can find these at Ballona. You can also find a lot of these at the Bixby Marsh. Gorgeous native plants. We tell the story about the native plants compared to the invasive plants, the importance, the difference, why you have to get rid of the non-natives so that the natives can thrive. Here along the levees and the jetties of Ballona, we have black oyster catchers. There's food. Bob Shaman, who is a fixture in the South Bay, who runs Wild Birds Unlimited and run Redondo Beach, he and we go out and collect discarded fishing line and try to teach the local fishermen this is not a good idea. Do not discard your fishing line. The birds get tangled up in it. Here are birders along the creek looking into the wetlands. Ballona is a major migratory stop. As you can see, thousands of birds come here. And in the channels, what we discovered one year, much to my amazement, is all the wildlife that lives there. So here are all the fish species that are thriving in the channels as babies. And this is important. If we don't have these channels for these baby fish to grow, you're not going to find them in the bay. So again, I work for Loyola Marymount University. I'm a fellow in the Center for Urban Resilience, and we partner with the Friends on educational programs throughout the wetlands. This is Dr. Jim Landry, who's the co-director of the Coastal Research Institute at LMU. This is a new institute that started a few years ago. Dr. Dorsey, who's retired, but we keep dragging him back in to teach students with teachers and students out on the viewing platform. Here you can see the viewing platform in the distance. This is Dan Cooper teaching us about birds. Again, Dorsey on the creek. Earth Day celebrations, Coastal Cleanup Day celebrations, field trips. We have a lot of signage and maps and things to tell people the story about sustainable messaging. Heal the Bay Creek Week. We've partnered with other nonprofits to do projects in the wetlands. This is a group called Outdoor Afro, a wonderful group that comes out on a regular basis. I love this photo. I took this. These students from Occidental College were standing there and this snowy egret photobombed them. I just loved this. Here's some kids looking out over a very full west channel. You can see it's at high tide. Here's some kids looking out over the East Channel. And we had actually amazing performances and productions done, written and inspired by the freshwater marsh. We participated in a World Festival of Sacred Music, and we also honor politicians that help us and civic-minded members of the community who do what they can to promote the restoration of wetlands all through Southern California. We've had Ben Allen out into the wetlands. Here are people picking up trash along the creek. And by the way, the creek is cleaner than it's ever been. One of our emeritus board members remembers kayaking on this creek and seeing nothing but a sea of bobbing styrofoam cups. I couldn't believe what he was describing to me. So we've come a long way. We can do better. We can still do better, but we've come a long way. This group from New Roads, these students collected straws one day and came back 3 days in a row and collected over 500 straws. It was crazy. And one of the projects I'm involved in that you can come and visit when we can gather people at the park again is our Grow Native program that's hosted by the Friends of Bionah Wetlands. We teach people about native plants. You can take plants home and put them in your own garden. We also partner with South Bay Wildlife Rehab, and we have Ann Lynch and her crew come out with her ambassador birds. One of the things I'm very proud of is being part of the formation of the Wetlands Restoration Principles Coalition. This is a group of 19 organizations that decided we needed to come up with a systematic list of what's important when you do restoration, because we knew the Bionah Wetlands restoration was coming up. There's other restorations going on in the state. What do we need to do it right? And we came up with this list. And here's a list of successfully restored projects. Bixby isn't on this list, but it's on another list. Here are some of the organizations involved. Very credible, very reputable. This is a fact versus fiction handout that the Friends created in partnership with the Wetlands Restoration Principles Group. And the reason we're doing this is that there's some bad information out there. There's some misinformation about the Bionah Wetlands restoration that you need to know about. Again, the goal is ecosystem restoration and socioeconomic value. It's really an environmental justice issue. And we have a restorative justice department at the Center for Urban Resilience. We feel this is really important. Again, this is what it's going to look like if they restore it. What I'm excited about is they're going to break up Bionah Creek and let it flow into areas that desperately need this tidal flow. So reconnecting natural hydrology is really important. Yes, there will be bulldozers, there will be heavy machinery, because we don't have another 40 years to do this. I want to see this in my lifetime. And it's not going to happen if we go at a snail's pace. What's really exciting to me is the increase of public access, especially people in wheelchairs that can come out on boardwalks into the wetlands on well-regulated trails so that the wildlife isn't disturbed. And the gas company has gotten a bad rap lately because people are sending out misinformation about their wells. The wells are being removed. They're not putting in new wells. They're not managing their resources there anymore. If anything, they're just making sure it's safe. And a lot of thought has gone into the restoration plans. This is just a sequence of events showing that how it's going to adapt to sea level rise, depending on which alternative they pick. Now they picked alternative 1, and it will get modified. It's not set in stone, but the long-term benefits are crucial. We need to improve biodiversity, increase public access, increase climate change resistance, improve the scenic beauty, and bring more habitat in for endangered and sensitive species by allowing the native plants to thrive and getting rid of the non-native plants. Here was one of Mary Thompson's original visions of the wetlands. And what I'm providing here at the end, at the conclusion of my presentation, is a list of material for you to read up on the Bionah wetlands. And also, these are great videos, by the way, about Bionah. What you can do to make a difference, go here to learn more. Here where you can find out more about the Bionah wetlands, all these organizations. Here are the 4 areas you can go, and as of today, you can go to the Bionah Discovery Park on your own, even with COVID-19, just be safe. You can go to the freshwater marsh, although we're having some issues right now with people parking on Jefferson and it's not safe. So I actually hesitate inviting you to come until they get that cleaned up. You can go to the creek along the Bionah Creek bike path. You cannot go to the salt marsh unless you come in under a permitted tour by the Friends of Bionah Wetlands or LA Audubon, and they're not doing it right now because of COVID-19. But you can come to the park, so I highly recommend you come. I may see you there someday.
That's fantastic.
We've been doing this for 40 years, so we know what we're doing. Here's some information on who to contact for tours. And this is what you can do to make a difference in your home garden. There's a local ESB, El Segundo Blue Coalition. You can do this in your own garden in the South Bay. All kinds of fun stuff. I know I've gone on, but I can't help myself. I'm so excited.
No, it's fantastic, Lisa. I think some of our attendees have said it best. Diana said, wonderful presentations. I think it's been a call to action. Lisa said thank you and that she learned so much. And Kathy said it's awesome. I think what you've done is you've shown us how someone like Mary Thompson's story, how each of us can make a difference. If there's been one major benefit out of this pandemic, it's been how all of us have collaborated and seen that connectivity more, and how Bixby is connected to Bayona, and how, you know, when I first heard from you, I heard, you know, your marshland 600 acres, mine is 17, or the district says, you know, what can we do? And then you talked about how much vibrancy that 26-acre fresh marshland brought back. And there's just so much. And what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing from Joy and from others, people are saying they love the presentation and thank you so much. We'd certainly open it up for questions at this point, but I think the main takeaway for people, and I think we've heard this through some of our broadcasts with Tracy and with Bob Shaman, is that individually we can make a difference, but as a community we can change everything. And so this was certainly exciting. I particularly love the American okay, so I will visit. Oscar says, thank you, Lisa. I'm going to visit the Bayona wetlands, and he can't wait to see you out there. Great presentation. So, and Marianne too. Everybody's just, they're not asking questions. They're just giving you accolades for the excellent work that you're doing, Lisa. So thank you for that. I think another takeaway is just that these resources are available in our communities right now, and in safe ways, obviously with the, oh my goodness, Diana says she grew up near Bolsa Chica wetlands and really appreciates the work that a lot of these groups do. So thank you for that. Really wonderful. I do see one question. Okay, maybe. So where do we get access? So this is a really important one, to all of these resources. And we're gonna post them, and we're going to get the information both on our website, and I know they're available on the Friends website as well. And so if you go to the Bixby site, we're going to provide some links to some of these resources. Lisa did a fantastic job of taking 30 years worth of experience and putting it into 60 plus minutes. We did a great job. So fantastic. And can we visit Bixby at the moment? And thank you for asking that and for that clarification. That's why we're having these broadcasts. Our marshland, due to safety reasons and also essential services, is not open to the public at the moment. Of course, we're letting the experts such as Lisa and Tracy and other biologists come in and make sure that we have a thriving ecosystem. Oh my gosh, Joy is asking how often we're doing these virtual presentations. So thank you for that segue. The first Saturday of every month at 8 in the morning. Tell your friends, tell people who you know at other conferences. We've had folks join us from Spain. We've had folks join us from England. So one of the great strengths of this virtual world is that we are able to connect. It's much better in person, and it's much better when you can actually see the wildlife. We all understand that. But oh, and Oscar's asking what the bird count numbers were when we did them in December.
Oh, I think we had 38 species that
There,
morning. Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
so that's one 17-acre marshland here in your community, and one day, and they're only out there for about 45 minutes. Look at everybody's just like giving you applause. So that's all I'm seeing out there. Well, with that, I will wrap it up. Lots and lots of fabulous information. Do not lose us. You can still go. And that was, I think, the really big takeaway from Lisa, is that although you can't come to Bixby right now, we're going to keep broadcasting. So tune in on Saturday mornings, first Saturday of every month at 8. We're trying to bring you a featured different expert each month. And then we started the new year off with a live broadcast, which gave you more of an organic feel, so you guys could virtually get out there. But yes, we want to stay connected with all of these efforts that our whole community has been doing for years and years. We don't want to lose that momentum during this pandemic. So thank you everyone for tuning in. With that, I myself will give applause and thanks to Lisa, and we're going to sign off.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone.
Thank you very much.